everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. My name is Ruben Mendive, and I am your host. So how I start every episode is I have my guests introduce themselves. So your name, where you're from, and how you identify.
Cool. Hi, my name is Giuliani Alvarenga. I grew up out here in Los Angeles. My family is from El Salvador. And I grew up all over East LA, Lincoln Heights, Highland Park. And so I identify as queer, gender non-binary, and I am excited to be here today.
Perfect. Great. So, I always like to go into like people's stories from the beginning, before the beginning. So, what's your family story? What does that mean? And also, what does that mean to you?
Both my parents, they're from El Salvador, but they definitely have different trajectories. They had different economic backgrounds. So like my father, he grew up in Ciudad Arce near San Salvador, and he grew up very poor. My mother, she moved around San Martin area, San Benito. She grew up pretty middle class, went to private school her whole life. Mm-hmm. And they eventually met out here. And so they have been, they're not together anymore. They divorced when I was 7. I guess kind of speaking a little bit about like the history of El Salvador and why we moved out here is because there was obviously a civil war that maybe people may know about. And my father's side of the family was really, really affected by this. They're the ones that witnessed a lot of the violence. I recall one of my family members telling me that my father witnessed someone being burned alive in their hometown, and he was maybe in his teens,
Oh, wow.
A teenager. Yeah. So that really affected him, and that is probably why he is the way he is now. And his toxic masculinity, which makes it hard for me to talk to him. I haven't spoken to him in a few years, and it gets pretty deep, right? It's like this transgenerational trauma that happens. My mother's family grew up Jehovah's Witness. It's another thing. That's another factor in my life that's really caused a stir, if you will. They moved out here when she was about 17, 18. They weren't so much affected by the war as much, but they did have the privilege to choose a side between Arena and FMLN. And we are I'm personally pro FMLN. In theory, the spirit of this revolutionary cause to dismantle the right-wing injustices that happened. But at the same time, I do want to emphasize how folks who had the privilege to choose a side sometimes spoke volumes, as opposed to other people who were hiding in their homes because they didn't know who was who, and they didn't have the luxury to choose a side. Yeah. They were just trying to choose their families and their safety. So I think that does have some sort of an effect. My grandfather's nephew, he's a human rights director at the university, the Jesuit University in El Salvador. Just a little bit of background about us and my mom's side. My aunt, for example, studied sociology at the university there, the Jesuit University, and she got really involved with the FMLN party and did some illegal stuff that got her in trouble and made headlines, to the point that my grandmother was like, "Sos una vergüenza para mi religión, de los testigos de Jehová, y que no sé qué." And so she sent her out here, essentially, but not because of the political controversy, more so because of el que dirán in my grandmother's faith with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah. And a funny little side story about Jehovah's Witnesses in El Salvador, there's a theory that they were sent out there to depoliticize people because a lot of the Jesuits and Catholics were getting very active. I don't know if you know, but there were some Jesuits that were assassinated out there, and Monsignor Romero being the most famous one, right? Who's now a saint. So there's just that undertone of this revolutionary cause and awakening in at the time within that Catholic Church, which is funny if we talk about Catholicism as a whole, right? But within that point in time, it was very anti-right wing, and I think that's why they sent a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses out there, because first of all, they're politically neutral. They don't vote. They don't do anything. They don't go to war, period. They're in their own little bubble, their own little cult bubble. And so there's a theory that they were sent out to depoliticize people. But yeah, that's another reason why my mom's side for sure wasn't as involved with the war. We did have family that was FMLN, like my grandfather's nephew, Benjamin Cuellar, who is now, he does human rights work at the university. He is very heavily FMLN, and his brother was Arena. So I don't even know if they still talk now, but it kind of divided the family up a little. Yeah. It's just that like my own interfamily wasn't as involved because of the Jehovah's Witness faith, but they still had families involved in that dynamic. And so once my aunt was sent out there, my uncle as well, who was actually caught in a checkpoint and was tortured too, but he wasn't really so much involved as politically, but he was just caught, in a bad situation. So all this to say that, when my grandma found my tia in jail, she was like, oh no, I'm sending you out here. Like, you're lucky to even be alive.
Yeah.
My mom didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
So she moved out here when she was pretty young.
And what did your parents do for a living out here? Still do for a living? Like, how do they make money here?
Yeah. So again, I think it also goes back to class for sure. Mm-hmm. My father, when I was little, I would always see him doing like work in antique shops, especially out in West Hollywood, which is like predominantly the gay mecca of LA, right? Popularity. But back then, Melrose Street, over by West Hollywood, used to be filled with antiques. A lot of Jewish owners had these antique shops, and he would repair Persian rugs and other antiques. And every now and then I'd go visit him, on my breaks, and just kind of like be his little helper and stuff and watch him work the shop. So I was because we grew up in the East Side. So I was introduced to the West Side at an early age. Yeah. And LA, in terms of West Side, East Side is very segregated. Yeah. The West Side is predominantly rich, and the East Side was more poor and migrant wise. And so a lot of that also speaks to, the tropes of like queer identity and LGBT, because all these white gay men were out there, and I was also exposed to that. And at the same time, my father had a lot of gay white men who he would work for, who would also hypersexualize him, which also speaks volumes, right? Yeah. And so me growing up being gay, it's like I see that in hindsight as such a complicated situation. Yeah. And I've always used literature as a way of navigating those experiences, which is why one of the books that really, really resonates with me, that reminds me of the relationship of me and my father, is the book Zigzagger by Manuel Munoz. And it's like the queer House on Mango Street.
I got to read this. I haven't heard of this.
And there are vignettes as well. And there's this one story that just really, really, it's called By the Time You Get There, By the Time You Come Back. And I might be butchering the title right now, but it's something along those lines. But it really does speak about being a second generation, being queer, having a father who maybe had him too young, and at the same time is trying to understand his gay son, and at the same time can't. And there's this really bad relationship, and it doesn't matter that his son is doing so well, in terms of like education or however you want to quantify that, but there's still that little dot or spot there that the father can't like let go of. And so it's a very, very powerful story, especially because it talks about being in the Bay, the queer son being in the Bay. And I read this when I was going to school in Berkeley, and my father still being here in Koreatown. It just kind of like had layers, like a little palimpsest of emotions coming out. But that's definitely the book that I try to understand in order to make sense of the relationship with my father and I. And we don't have a relationship. We haven't had one in years since I came out to him as an undergrad. And so it's been a little over 8 years.
Got it. And like, what did your mom do for a living?
My mom, she kind of already knew English by the time she got here. I mean, she went to private school, so she learned English pretty fast. And she eventually got her own business. She ran her own auto insurance business and included life insurance and renter's insurance, like very vocational work. Yeah. But she ran her business, and she was always the breadwinner, which is another thing, going back to toxic masculinity, fragile masculinity of sorts. My father always felt he was lesser than her because she was the breadwinner, and she called the shots. And my mom is she's a Virgo, so she runs her household the way she wants. And I don't think my father liked that a lot. And it was hard for him to navigate that until finally they decided to separate when I was 7. And I just remember growing up, my mom would tell me, like, I don't want you to be like that man that man's a coward. You're not going to be like that. And it kind of sucks sometimes to hear that. And then you're going to work with your father and you see him also being shamed at work with these white men who would sometimes be like, oh, Giuliani is the only Alvarenga I would sell my antiques to, you know. And at 7 years old, hearing that shit, I'm just like, well, fuck this shit. I'm not gonna buy their fucking shit. And like, don't you dare talk to my father like that. So even though he and I don't have a relationship anymore, I still like have compassion for him, because that must have been hard. And I can't even relate to that, what that must have been like for someone, a recent migrant, you know, trying to navigate a language he doesn't know so well, and also being self-conscious about his background and how he came about. That it's sometimes hard, because I think that he also projects my mother. He projects me as my mother a lot. And that's one of the reasons why we don't talk anymore, because he probably thinks que soy fresa o que no sé qué and stuff. And I'm more like her. And he would always say, you're just like your mother. You're just like your mother. And so I know that there's layers to that right there that we've never talked about. And I can only speculate that that's where it's coming from.
Yeah. And so, like, you know, can you speak to what it was like growing up in LA? Like, what did your household look like? Like, what was the neighborhood like, you know?
So we moved around a lot. My mom had this anxiety, and I want to say it's also PTSD on her end, because they would move around a lot too when the war happened, to like be in a safer area. So every 2 years she needed to move. So we would move all over, and I'm telling you, everywhere in LA. I went to like 5-6 elementary schools.
Oh wow.
And so she's just had this anxiety that she needed to move. She couldn't be planted in one place. And I think that also speaks to the fact that she was separated from her community. She was like literally stripped of her Salvadoran, like su tierra. And, you know, she was happy out there. You know, she didn't want to come out here. She only came here because of my tia, but she was stripped of her identity. And I think that was one of the ripple effects of her. And, you know, as a kid, you think like, oh, my parents, like why are they acting like this? You know, and it's like, when you think about it, they're like, well, my mom was like 18 when she had me. And so imagine myself now having like some 7-8-year-old kid or whatever, you know, or like preteen, just thinking like, fuck, what the fuck am I doing? You know? So in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, this is why they did what they did. And I am still trying to navigate certain things and not try and blame them for stuff, but at the same time really just learning to have compassion and just being like, dude, like your mom was like trying to figure it out, and she was like in her early 20s herself, mid-20s. So that really resonated with me later, even though I hated the fact that we always moved. But to answer that question, we started where, like Hollywood area, which is a big Salvi town too. We moved over to the northeast side, Highland Park, Lincoln Heights. And growing up out there, overall, I want to say that she worked really hard to make sure we had food in the fridge and she could take us out. She never spoiled us with toys, but we would always go out. Like, she would always take us to amusement parks, Disneyland. We would go hiking. We did a lot of stuff together, which is why in Spanish, in Salvi say, sos tienes pata de chucho, which means like you're just like sos bien callejero, you know? And so I'm very, funny. I love to travel and I love to explore, and I'm like, I want to say I'm very like savvy when it comes to like figuring out transportation and just navigating and stuff. And it's just because I have heard of things. She's the one that opened my world to that, and she wanted us to sort of be independent. So I'm always curious to like how, you know, people were in school. So like elementary school to middle school, like just what was your experience of that time, you know? Because you're moving around a lot, you're going to different schools. So like, oh my God, so I'm always just curious to like how that looked through your eyes, you know? Well, my last name is Alvarenga, so it starts with an A. So I always knew that people would call me first on the roll call and they didn't know how to pronounce my name, Giuliani. And I was named after a soccer player. My father, to this day, he probably still does play soccer from what I can, you know, think, you know, just asking around and stuff. But like, I think he still plays soccer, and he was a goalie. So Giuliani was an Italian goalie. And I think that's where my parents, you know, had the common ground between like, oh, I like Giuliani, and my father liked it because it reminded him of sports and, you know, this whole machismo kind of concept of things. But I know I share a name with a, you know, very eccentric, corrupt man that's Trump's attorney. And so it's just the irony of that. But
That's funny.
for the record, I was named after an Italian goalie.
It didn't even occur to me till you said it.
I got that a lot, especially post 9/11. His name always popped up, and so they would call me the mayor in middle school and stuff. Yeah, it was hard for me to navigate that because I was always the new kid. I was always nerdy though, because even though I was learning English still, like I always tried to read as much as I could at home. And I eventually, like, my mom would always be like, when you go to the school, you tell them that you just speak English. And that's what we would do. But I was still struggling because all we spoke in the house was Spanish.
Got it.
But, she would always be like, one day you're going to thank me because you're going to be bilingual. And sure enough, I'm bilingual.
Yeah.
If anything, I learned Spanish academically through the Jehovah's Witnesses because I would always read the literature in Spanish. I would always preach, go door to door in Spanish since I was like 5. I was kind of just born into it. And so public speaking, learning how to project your voice, you're correcting yourself, etc. Like with the Jehovah's Witnesses basically prepared us. And I was about to do missionary work in Ivory Coast. I was going to learn French and just move out there.
And that's something that's curious to me, just like as like a Mexican immigrant, Mexican family, grew up in a very Mexican city. And Chicago is also like a very Catholic city. So for the most part, I remember when I first in high school met like this Latina who was Jehovah's Witness. And I was like, oh, like I didn't know that was a thing. So sort of, can you speak to growing up as a Jehovah's Witness and like that household? Because I truly don't know that much about it. Because you see them all over LA, like So I'm always curious.
See them,
passing it. I don't even know if they pass stuff out. They just sort of just stand there. But
they stay there now. That's a new thing. But when I was I was younger, we would go door to door, and what they call esquinitas. So we'd approach people in the donut shops, especially like construction folks who are like heading to work early, like, and because we were like a Latino audience, we specifically looked for Spanish speakers. But I mean, they don't celebrate birthdays, Christmas, Halloween, Thanksgiving, St. Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day. So every time we had a holiday in elementary school, I would go to the principal's office and my friends were just passing out candy to each other, and I started to read a lot, and that's when I really got into reading. Reading was always my escape. It was always what kept me busy, especially because as a Jehovah's Witness and living in a strict household, we didn't really have friends. So like my friends were like these characters in my books. Got it. Animorphs, Harry Potter. I read a lot of like Silverstein poetry, the Giver Tree, different books that to this day still hold a special place in my heart. And when I got older, I was still a Jehovah's Witness, and I was a very devout Jehovah's Witness. I got baptized. I would read a lot in Spanish, and I loved analyzing the Bible and the symbolism behind it. And that was just like my literary analysis, just working, because that's kind of all of it that I had at the time. But even when I was in 6th grade and my sister and I were old enough to take care of ourselves after school, we just go to the library and just do our homework and read. And I just read all kinds of books all day until my mom picked us up because, my mom was a single parent. My father did his best with child support, but it's hard to raise a family and do stuff. So after a while, it's like, okay, you're old enough to take care of yourselves. I can save some money by not getting a babysitter. And y'all can just go to the library or Barnes and Noble, which is what we did when I was in high school. And little by little, I just devoured these books, and it's why I became an English major in college. Yeah. So, and that's another thing I'm always interested in high school. Like I always ask people, like, who were you at that time? Who were you pretending to be? And how did people see you? I was definitely like a little wallflower child, kind of shy, very innocent, very Jehovah's Witness, like carrying a lot of Jehovah's Witness guilt, because I knew I was gay since I was little. I knew I had like a different vibe, and I just tried to fight it a lot, and as much as I could. I couldn't until eventually I could only do so much. But I remember I was an editor for our high school newspaper. Okay. So I did like the Spanish column and the English columns. Oh, cool. It was a bilingual newspaper. I was in AP classes. I was the nerdy one. But I also had like my little community of other like Latino, like nerdy black and brown kids, we were all just together. The Avid kids. I don't know if you know what that program is, Avid. No. It's like this like upper bound college thing.
Got it. Yeah.
And so we were always in the same classes. Like we were a little small cohort in our school. And we were notoriously known for like being like the school that had like las cholas with the daycare, because we had all the pregnant girls, and so we were kind of like had that reputation, as opposed to our counterpart rival school that was predominantly white and rich. But we all really supported each other, especially within our own little cohort. There was a lot of support, and I'm still really close to a lot of them now.
Cool.
You know? And we're all doing our lives, we're all doing things now, but we're still really close because we knew what that was like.
Yeah. And so like after high school, like what was the plan? Did you have a plan for what you wanted to do once you graduated?
Yeah, they reached the point where like my mom didn't want me to go to college because Jehovah's Witnesses aren't supposed to go to a 4-year university.
Interesting.
They're really scared that you're going to lose your faith and just derail into this worldly situation.
I didn't know that.
So I was like, wait. And I was always like this like honor student since I was
Yeah.
little. And I'm like, you always liked that about me. You always took pictures of me. You always, because we couldn't have birthdays, so she would have graduation parties for me. She got a little creative with it.
Got it.
And every now and then she'd throw me a graduation party, because she was like, oh, you were in the honor roll. Oh, you were like, you know, writer of the month and in like 5th, 6th grade. And so she was like, I'll throw you a little graduation party, because we can't call it a birthday party. We're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And but then after, out of nowhere, like I think she really clung to her faith about like what it meant as a single mother trying to remarry into a Jehovah's Witness background with a family that did not like us, and they're Jehovah's Witness. And they discriminated her a lot because she was Salvadoran and a single parent. And that's my first time really understanding like this tension between Mexicans and Salvadorans was like in 3rd grade. And like kind of like from then on, you know, because my mom eventually married my stepdad, and I love my stepdad so much, but his family not at all. Like they were really, they treated us terribly, like like abuse and things that my mom doesn't even know probably happened because she wasn't around, she was working. And so all that to say that she really tried to like form a new family with her faith. She wanted that perfect picture. She didn't want the same mistake to happen again, and she regrets some stuff now, and it's just stuff that we're trying to talk through because we recently started talking again, which I really like. And it's just a growing process at this point, and I'm seeing a therapist about this too, so it's just something that I'm growing as I go along. And I advise her to also see a therapist because it's just something that we can grow together. You know, it's a way of growing together. So, so basically, like I rebelled. I was like, okay, you don't want me to go to college? That's ridiculous. And I was taking these AP classes and even taking community courses, because I was like, I'm gonna get some credits before I go there. So I remember her like some nights looking at me like coming back from the Jehovah's Witness meeting and seeing me study for an exam, and she's like, what are you doing? This is why you didn't come to the meeting, because you're studying? And I would look at her and be like, you're so crazy. I said, other parents would love to have a kid like me. So I started to think like, well, fuck this shit. She's not going to pay for my college application. She's not going to pay for my AP exams. I have to figure it out. So I started to work. I started working at the Barnes & Noble, my local, the one that I used to read at. I got a job there at the cafe, and eventually I got 2 jobs. I did that part-time, and then I worked at a retail store part-time. And it wasn't until I started working at the retail store that I'm like, okay, I can't hide that I'm gay anymore. Like, there's really cute guys here. And
hilarious. Wait, what retail store though?
Oh my God, Aeropostale.
That'll do it.
And there was this really cute guy there named Oscar, and he had like this Johnny Depp vibe to him, like Edward Scissorhands, like artistic, like queer, like rockero kind of vibe. And I was just like enthralled. Like I was just like falling in love. And we didn't date or anything, but he really was a good person. And he took me to my first gay bar at 17 called Tiger Heat. Back in the day when Tiger Heat was at Arena. Now it's over at the Avalon. But
interesting.
I don't know if you know that there used to be Arena and Circus.
I've heard tell of Circus and Arena from just like more so like older Latinx gays who like that's where they partied, grew up.
Exactly. So like Thursday nights was Tiger Heat, and it was like this bubblegum pop scene where like a bunch of little twinks under 18 coming in.
Yeah.
I used to see Jeffree Star there right before he got really big. He was already an underground like party monster kind of guy.
Yeah.
But this is way before he blew up with his their makeup and everything.
Yeah.
And so but yeah, and they were kind of like very predatory, because I knew a friend who kind of like got lost in drugs with this person, and so it really sucks, because that's sometimes the narrative of a lot of queer folks.
Yeah,
we're trying to find ourselves, and we try to lose ourselves in some ways with things, and so that happens sometimes. And it's not to shame anyone, because even I can personally say that I know what it's like to be there, and so I'm not trying to shame anyone. This is my life too, and so I'm just saying what I've seen and what I've done and what I felt is all coming from me.
I'm curious, like, your mom was coming home from like these meetings and like seeing you studying. Like, what was the vision she had for your life if it wasn't going to be school?
She thought I was going to be a missionary.
Like
doing missionary work. Because I was already doing like 50 hours a month preaching and going to school and giving biblical talks on stage, because when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're supposed to give speeches. You're supposed to speak about a biblical situation. You give your little speech and it's like 15 minutes, but that's how they taught us to like project our voice, to give a presentation. They really trained us. Like I really do thank them for that, but at the same time, it was kind of like this little sick, twisted way of learning how to do this. But I've been telling people that I've been canvassing since I was 5, because I've been doing this. It's like true. It's how I was raised to like speak to someone about the Bible in Spanish and make it's a really who wants to do that? Such an uncomfortable situation, and people were not nice to us.
So you're working retail. You started working to pay for school. So like, what came from that, I paid
for my school. I paid for all my UCs, and because I got free affordable lunch, or like that, like free lunch in school, I was able to like apply to 4 UCs. I applied to 2 more. I got into all the Cal States. I got into all the UCs except one, UCLA. They never accepted my ass.
Not better.
Not bitter. But I mean, like, I made it all happen on my own. And even after she kicked me out at 17, I still continued to do that. She kicked me out. We were living in Riverside at the time. I was going to go to Santa Barbara, but I decided to go to UC Riverside because I was already working, and I met a guy there who had just graduated from UCR, and we're still really close friends. He's to this day one of my closest friends, even though we're not together anymore. But he let me live with him. He's like, just live with me, figure out your financial situation, because you can't get FAFSA right now, but maybe you can figure it out. And I went to the LGBT center at UCR, and they're like, we're going to write you a letter of support so you can be financially independent. You're going to have to apply for this every year, but you don't have to worry about your parents' income. And that's how I put myself through school.
And what did you study in school?
I did a double major. I did women's studies, literature, and a minor in Spanish. And then when I transferred to UCBerkeley, the women's studies department was called gender women's studies. So I did a double major and a minor in Spanish literature, and then the double major with gender women's studies and English literature.
Got it. And can you talk about the transition to go to Berkeley, and like, what was that for you, but also like in the terms of your family, like what was that like?
So my mom and I were like always on and off, and we stopped talking to each other around that time again. And I remember I was dating another guy by then, Lee, and he's still another really close friend of mine now. Like, these two people are like my first loves, and obviously they're my friends now for a reason. But we moved to New York because we actually experienced a hate crime at UCR, which is one of the reasons why we ended up transferring. Some guy saw us holding hands when we were walking back from the Blockbuster up the street on University, heading back to campus, and we were like 3 blocks away. Technically speaking, that area in downtown Riverside was still owned by UCR, and they jumped us, they hit us, and they just said like, homophobic slurs. We went to the emergency room. Our heads were bleeding, things like that. And but I must say that the people at the LGBT center at UCR, like Nancy and Toy, shout out to them because they're still out there. They're just some of the most amazing people in the world. And they really advocated for us, and they helped us during that time. And it wasn't easy, but we needed to take some time off from school, and I moved to Long Island with him. That's when I was telling you that I was with my Puerto Rican family, and I still love his mother, and we still talk and everything. But yeah, that's what happened. And then it didn't work out with Lee and I, and he was from Long Island originally. He wanted to stay, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna go back because I have to finish school. And I applied to Berkeley, and I got in. And Berkeley was a whole new chapter because I actually, at that point in time, I wanted to get the hell out of Riverside. I love UCR to this day. It's a special place in my heart. But Riverside is where my stepdad's family is, and I still have really bad memories of them. Yeah. So I needed to get out of there. Yeah. And thankfully I did. But Berkeley was cool because I'm like, oh, this is what it feels like to actually be a student out of town, doing what other students do when they go to another city, hours away, to just live their life. And I loved it. And I was a little older and more mature then, where I can still have fun but be responsible, and enjoy myself, and but still be like, no, I really like how far away I am from everyone. Like, I really like that. Even though I would miss LA, but not really, just more so like the streets, like just walking through and just really enjoying yourself, people watching, hearing music. Like, that's always been what LA has been like for me. And so, and I still miss that even when I'm in New Orleans now for law school, but I know that it's always going to be here, but I'm not homesick. I love being in New Orleans. I think that's an amazing city as well. And so I really like the opportunities to grow. And I'm thankful that I have the opportunity to be in a school so that I can use that as also another opportunity to travel and learn about somewhere else.
So can you talk about your time at Berkeley and sort of like what happened after?
Yeah, definitely. So like, I honestly, even though like I was at UCR for like just 2 years, and I did 3 years at Berkeley, I was like a fifth year. I didn't really know what to expect. I had the imposter syndrome for a quick second, but then I got into some like pretty prestigious like fellowships with the Andrew Mellon Foundation and for literature, and I got like summer funding, to do research and do archival research at the Bancroft Library, and I was in love with the research. My first summer there at Berkeley, I was doing archival research with this professor who is now the director of the English department at Berkeley, se llama Genaro Padilla, and we were talking about like incarcerated archives, incarcerated literature that was basically in this Bancroft Library. And these were letters from Mexican owners with what was called Alta California, Baja California, before these squatters came through, right? With their manifest destiny bullshit. And like, these folks were like writing these letters saying, these people are coming in, we're exchanging property, we're doing this, that. And his argument was that this needs to be part of the literary canon, that just because it was in Spanish doesn't mean it can't be translated. It doesn't mean that that's not also part of the American formation of literature, because it also speaks to the fact that there were people here, that the border crossed them, that there were generations here already here of Latinidad, right? Folks who identify as like Mexican in this case. And that was some of his research. So I was really excited because I was just like, that was my first time doing research, and we were using these little microfilms to read the letters and just kind of like looking through the scope. And the Bancroft Library is amazing. They have a lot of like history there. Berkeley bought a lot of literature like that represents Californian history, and so it is a shame that it's not part of an anthology somewhere, because it should be.
Got it. And so like, when did the writing start to come in for you? And this could be because you mentioned you were a reader, you were writing in school and elementary school and all that growing up. When did it become more of like for lack of a better word, professional, or like where it was something that you were identifying as a writer,
Oh, it definitely happened years later after my HIV status, because I was already doing work and writing, but it was always like just internships or like just opportunities to get published. I was excited for that.
And what were you writing before you switched over to, or before
HIV work? I really always liked fashion. I was always in this I always wanted to be like this Carrie Bradshaw of the gays.
Hilarious.
And there was like actually like this magazine, this online magazine that I was with called Crave with a K, Krave in San Francisco. And it was a gay man's literature online, like a magazine. And I was so excited to write for them. And I never got paid for it, but I'm just like, oh my God, I'm getting published now. I feel like Carrie Bradshaw.
Yeah, it's like, and I couldn't help but wonder. Yeah, that's funny.
So yeah, that was cool. But and then eventually like I just was kind of like just preparing for like school, and like kind of like I was a pre-law student by then, and for me that was kind of a whole new way of navigating, because I thought I was going to do a PhD. So it really took me a second to step back and be like, so was all this research that you did in vain? And I'm like, no, maybe not. Maybe you can still find a way, but you clearly don't have the path that you had when you were a Mel and May student. So figure it out. And so I took some time to work and do internships, and writing was always on the side. But it wasn't until like my HIV status that I was upset that I didn't have access to PrEP, and I wanted to write about it and be like, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that's dealing with this. And come to find out, a lot of Black and brown queer people were not having access to PrEP because people weren't giving it to them, these gatekeepers. So I was originally going to write my article with Fusion. I don't know if you've heard of that platform, but yeah. And I was working with the editor for like 6 months until finally he sent me over to another editor, and the editor was like, we can't publish this because you're talking about barebacking. And I'm like, well, no shit, how else did I get HIV? Like, I mean, there's other ways, but like that's my story. I had unprotected sex, and they did want to like publish that. And so I got mad. And I was like, my article was ready. It was ready to get published. This was the first one. I don't know if you read that one. That was like my first article, and I worked so hard because I wanted to get the nuances behind it, because I knew people would shame me because they're like, well, you should have used a condom. And like my argument is like, yeah, that's true. That's one of like my resources, but you're not seeing the whole point. I didn't have the opportunity to have all my tools in my tool belt. One of them was taken away from me. Do you not see that? That's what I'm trying to argue also. So it was a really hard article to write, because I was really trying to like just write the nuances about it, and also just meet people where they're at and just be like, yeah, I understand, but this is not the whole situation. And sure enough, when the article got published with The Body, a lot of controversy happened. But I'm really thankful for The Body, and a friend of mine recommended me to The Body. And then The Body was like, oh, do you want to write for us? And they gave me like a $700 check for this piece. And I'm like, what the fuck? You're like literally giving me money for this? And you want me to write, and you're going to start paying me? And they're not always paying me that much money, but they're paying me on average like $350 now. And I'm like, I'm grateful, because that's just my side hustle, And I'm writing for them, and I'm growing as a writer. And they're like, and my editor, Kenyon Farrow, has been incredible. He's our house mother. He's like, he really does mentor these other like young writers, and we call ourselves House of Pharaoh because Kenyon has just been an incredible support system for us, and a mentor. He's a journalist. He went to school for that. And so to be able to learn from him is a privilege, because it's like, this is stuff that I would probably be learning and having to pay for. And if anything, I'm getting paid for this process. So I'm really thankful for that. And I think that's when I was just, and this was like in 2017. And I think that now that to me is just like something I'm really thankful for. And I see The Body as family, a professional family. That we just care for each other. Yeah.
Because that's also like why, we were introduced through like my brother. But just reading your work, that's what I took away from it, especially that first article, where it's like, the writing was very much like the personal is political. So it's like, this is me as a person with the status, but it's also like, let me show you the policies, the regulations, the structural stuff that is out of my control as an individual that like contributed to this. And it's like, and I think you so powerfully say that in the article, where it's like, you point directly at it and like, this is how I got like contracted HIV because of all these other things forces working outside of myself, that like that it also isn't like just your story, This is like millions of people who like just don't have access, resources, knowledge, and like and those are all political decisions. Those are policies. Those are the gatekeepers deciding who gets what, and from them, who deserves it, so that's why I wanted to have you on, because I thought, first of all, that's very interesting writing to me, just like personalizing this bigger structure.
And you said it right, the personal is political, and that's something that I learned in a lot of like my gender and women's studies classes. This is a way of thinking that Black feminist theorists have paved the way for. Kimberly Crenshaw, who really speaks about intersectionality, Audre Lorde, who uses storytelling as a way to make impact, Gloria Anzaldúa, this third wave feminist movement. Like, these were like women of color that I learned how to read or write in this sense, and really speak about the social like injustices, the systemic issues that we're facing. So I definitely also must say that I learned a lot of that in my gender and women's studies classes, both at UCR and at Cal. And so it was really wonderful to be able to like harness that and apply what I've learned with my writing as an English major, just having to write a lot and just also using another tool to like, a creative tool or something, or using literature as a way to like analyze our society. And so those two majors sort of like were sort of what helped me understand myself, my positionality within this public health framework.
And it's like, what was it like to like publicly disclose your status, to like, people Google your name, it comes up, like, just like, what was the process of getting there, and like what has been like the reaction, so to speak? It's
been, I guess you can even see like when the articles that I have, if you like follow them in chronological order, it just kind of like also showcases how I've kind of grown within that as well. Because when I first outed myself as HIV pos, I was like, well, I've already done some of this work with GLAAD on storytelling, especially speaking about having been a homeless youth. And so I'm like, I think storytelling can be very powerful if we structure it and get the support, the baseline to really put the story out there. But I'm like, I'm not really too worried about, a part of me really was a little bit thinking like, my dad's going to know. And he said some really hurtful things in the past. So I think that if he realized that I was gay, he's just thinking, or HIV positive, he was just like saying, well, this is a fulfilled prophecy, because I knew he was going to die of AIDS, which is not true. And it's also a really problematic way to say something to someone, because that's what he said verbatim. But I think that is such a problematic narrative in of itself, because we're also not really understanding what it means to be HIV positive and have AIDS, which is a whole other conversation. AIDS is advanced HIV, and there's so many complications as to why someone has AIDS, and they definitely need care, because in terms of medical language, like their immune system is really down, and they're more susceptible to things. So like those are two different conversations, but it's such a stigmatized way of like almost como cursing someone that's queer. Like, you're gonna die of AIDS, like that's your curse, because we've had this history come in, and it's been like this dark wave that just has cast over a lot of queer men, and so it's so ingrained now in our culture that we just got to keep fighting that stigma, because we have years of and people who have died to sort of honor and also recognize that there is this stigma that we still have to fight and break.
Yeah. And, just speaking to like, what have you noticed from like your lived experience, writing, doing research, that is like the things that you see that contribute to like, that are uniquely like Latinx and affect Latinx, like queer people in terms of like HIV, like just because I've interviewed other people, like I had someone whose son was deaf, and was like, this is how it is for some people, it's a completely different story for Latinx folk. So I'm just wanted to know, like, what have you seen, the things that are like sort of like intertwine these two identities,
Well, there is an increase in HIV rates among Latinx communities for sure, and there's not a lot of research yet to really quantify why that's happening. There's speculations, and obviously it's going back to like issues that people face in the household, right, and finding a way to escape. So sometimes people will escape with like party drugs, and that's another culture in of itself that we're not really talking about, that's really affecting our communities, especially like crystal meth and G and all these other like drugs that kind of come into play. We also aren't talking about the anti-immigration rhetoric that's happening in our communities and how that's also scaring people into getting tested, scaring people into going to see a doctor, getting a physical, whatever, and then we just have our communities as a whole, and stigma is big. El que dirán is such a big conversation to have. Like, people don't want to talk about things. People are like maybe on the DL. People are not really out to family. People are just not really educating themselves on things that maybe they should. So there's just so many things that we can talk about, but we don't also have like the research for that either, or we haven't really had a study to really like analyze that. And so some of the articles that I write about really just come from different standpoints, because it's just dancing along with the dynamics that are happening, but there's really not a lot that we can really say, the article that I wrote about with the anti-immigration rhetoric and the correlation with HIV rates going up. I mean, I interviewed doctors at UCSF who told me like, yeah, there could be a correlation there between people getting, scared of getting tested, and because they're afraid that ICE will be at the hospital. And that's a reality. Yeah. That happened to my cousin. She went to the hospital in Atlanta, and she was deported right there because they found out she had a fake ID, and she was deported afterwards to El Salvador. So these are real stories. These are things that really happen. Part of as a writer is sort of exploring those like avenues and just realizing maybe that could be a correlation. And obviously I'm not doing this alone. My editor has been a huge guide for me, and Kenyon Farrow, which is funny because I used to read his stuff when I was in college, now is like sort of writing or teaching me how to write. And he's a strategist. He does a lot of work around Black queer communities and access to public health. And he has so much experience, years of experience. And so hearing him and having our meetings and our check-ins really just helps me really understand some of these issues. And so it's just been like an advisor, almost like working with him. Yeah. And, I guess, and again, you speak to like, the research that isn't being done, because again, with research and data comes funding, comes like all this stuff that like, if, the right person isn't in the room to ask those questions, to say this is something we should study, this is like the conversation that should even be like happening, that again is like another arm of like policy, because if you can't point to like hard data, then like it's like you don't even know there's a problem, so how can you treat it? So I want to ask about like, writing these articles, you're educating people about your experience, but just like a larger experience. What have you seen that are some of like the misconceptions that like, or things that you see like the public at large is still like ignorant about? I mean, there was just recently a study. It was a small study, but basically some millennials don't even know that how people can get HIV. They think that like hugging someone, kissing someone, sharing a cup of water with someone is going to cause HIV. It's a little absurd, because I'm like, are we really like back to basics like that? I mean, it's 2020. I would have thought that we would have already had the answers, but that goes back, just speaks on like my own standpoint, and just being like, no, Giuliani, you really need to go in and meet people where they're at. There are probably some people that just don't know, period. And it's not coming from a place of hate. They just don't know. And so we just gotta, I don't know. I really don't know where to begin with that, and I'm not sure if that's answering your question.
Oh, yeah. Just because as writers, how we write from a very personal place, and sometimes our own experiences, and something we feel like we need to like share. And it's always interesting to like, once that work is shared, the reactions, and people resonate with it. And so have you gotten like reactions from people, any like positive, and like any sense of like community from just your work?
Yeah, I've had like some community support. I've had people like sort of just like push back on some of the stuff that I've written. And some of the work that I do is very hybrid. It's like journalism, but then also it's personal. So, and sometimes it's in between. It's a hybrid of sorts. Yeah. But when I'm writing articles that are like coming from a journalist point of view, I can't give my opinion. Even Kenyon is like, even if you believe in the story, I totally am for you, but you also need to realize that you're not writing on a first person point of view. So you have to detach yourself. If you want, if you want to hear what this person is saying and it resonates with you, then quote them at the end of your article and finish with that. Let that be the seal, because that's still your words, but it's coming from someone else, and we need to hear from other people, and you're coming from a different perspective right now. He always keeps me in check, like, this is the avenue you're taking, and this is the avenue you're going to take here, and sort of like that's been a learning experience for me, and I like that a lot. It's just little techniques that he as a journalist has taught me, and I'm still anywhere near that, but it's just gives me some insight. But I've had some pushback from people when I've talked about, you know, these older gay men who groom younger folks, and there's like this like whole party scene with drugs that kind of comes into play, and the leveraging of that. And a lot of like older white men are like, you're shaming people, you're like shaming drug use, which is only going to create a bigger stigma. And I'm like, I'm trying really hard not to do that, because that's not where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to shame anyone. I'm trying to shame the folks who are trying to groom people. And you can groom people even without drugs. Yeah. You know, when you become a predator, a sexual predator, that's the problem. That power dynamic. Yeah. And so those are the things that I'm calling out. And so I've had some pushback from older white gay men about that. I've had some pushback about this one article that I wrote about the AIDS memorial on Instagram, who was just kind of like just posting like white people's stories that were dying. And I'm just like, I only see one black person on your story right now. Like, what's up? And I messaged him, and he automatically blocked me. And so I wrote an article about that, and he got so pissed that he started to write a lot of hate mail on me, because he has a big platform on Twitter and on Instagram. And then a lot of people were just kind of hating on me, older white gay men, like, why are you trying to separate us? Why are you like, why are you doing this? He's doing such good work. And it's like, again, not enough critical thinking going on, because it's like, I'm not trying to separate anyone, but I really want you to check your privilege as a white man, and like the fact that you're not really being inclusive of black and brown people. And have you even ever been, you know, like, and that's a whole other conversation in of itself that we can dive into, but they don't see that. And I'm not about to explain to every single person what I'm saying, because that's going to be taxing on me. So I just learned just to ignore people after a while.
And what are some of the things, you know, just in your writing that you're interested in, that you still feel like, you know, that you want to write about, you want to address? Like, is there stuff that you're just like ready to like start sharing and like chomping at the bit to like be like, we need to talk about this, you know?
So like for World AIDS Day this year, the body did something called For the Culture, which really just spoke about like these like influencers, or like historic influencers within the AIDS epidemic. And so I wrote about Gia Karanji, and her story has always resonated with me. Like, she was like the first supermodel, and she had like this very, very like powerful story, and then it became very tragic. But within that tragedy, there was also beauty, and she was like one of the first, you know, cis women to like really be known for like having HIV and then AIDS later. And that really just speaks to the fact that it wasn't a quote unquote gay disease like the people thought. And even now, the CDC definitely needs to change the language around how they classify what certain sex risks look like to catch HIV, and just be more mindful of the nuances, and also addressing the fact that there are trans women who have HIV but are still being categorized as gay men, and that's problematic as fuck. So that's a whole other layer of itself, but it does speak to the fact that more work needs to be done. And I think that Gia's story really like opened a door for these kinds of conversations as well, because anyone can have HIV and AIDS, straight, even if you're in a monogamous relationship. And so it's just like, you just always just gotta like just be aware of that, and just not think that, oh, that doesn't affect me, that's not my problem. Because when we think like that, we dismiss the problem, and that makes a bigger snowball effect. But when we realize, no, this is all, we're all interconnected, we're all beings that live in the same society, in the same niche, and for better or for worse, we fuck each other despite our class background, the color of our skin, how we identify our gender identities, etc. We just have a contact because we're a species that connect with each other, right? And so the more we realize that this is more about our problem, the sooner we'll find some more answers to things.
And I kind of want to talk to you about the work you're doing now. You know, you're in New Orleans, you're in law school. You're working with the CDC, so like, can you just educate us on what you've been up to?
Yeah, so I'm working right now with the CDC's program Let's Stop HIV Together. And a lot of what we're doing is sort of like kind of like what we're doing right now, talking about HIV, addressing certain misconceptions, talking about how PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis is available, which is a blue pill that people can take every day to prevent HIV, and it's like 98% effective, roughly. Like I'm kind of roughly speaking the numbers, but it's really high up there. It's effective, very effective. I'm also talking about how U equals U, which means that undetectable means untransmittable, and I'm undetectable. And if I were to have bareback sex with someone, this one dude down the street, and we have sex, like I can't give him the virus. Statistically speaking, the chances are so low. Yeah. And they're even more so low if he wants to be on PrEP. And they're even more so low if he wants to use a condom or I use a condom. It's just different ways of understanding things. But people come from a place of shame rather than advocacy. And they think that the condom is the solution to all things. And that's not true. 80-something% of the time. Oh, it's only 80% of the time effective, right? Or so it says in the label. It's supposed to just prevent one. It's a strategy, but just one. But there are more than one. Yeah. And I don't think people really understand the nuances behind that. So, it just takes the conversation.
I always like to ask writers, who are the people that they admire? So who are the other writers who are like heroes of yours? These could be peers. These could be like people who you don't even know, who you're just like Instagram stalking, but you love the work they're doing. So who are some of those people for you?
I really like Louis from the Gran Varones.
Okay.
And they do really cool work out in DC and Philly. Storytelling. They do an incredible job at storytelling, and they also have a fellowship that mentors young queer HIV pause folks so that they can do their storytelling. And that's incredible because we all need to learn how to share our story. We all have a powerful narrative regardless of what you want to talk about and how you want to share that. And so Louis is really teaching people how to share their story through digital work, through music, through so many creative avenues. Yeah. So that's someone that I really admire. Obviously, Kenyon Farrow is someone that I incredibly admire and have so much respect for. Yeah, I mean, definitely like a queer POC literary canon like James Baldwin, Manuel Munoz, theorists like Jose Munoz, and Gloria Anzaldúa, definitely Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined intersectionality as a black feminist, a black feminist theorist. Like, not a lot of people realize that she's the one who coined intersectionality when people want to talk about that. And she's specifically talking about the legal system for black women and how they fall into it. Yeah. So there's just some background there, but these are just amazing writers that I've really picked up on over the years, and I've taken something from them, and I've sort of just kind of built it into something of my own.
What themes do you see through your writing, through the work you do, through the things you're studying? What do you think is the drive behind that? If you had to pick a through line to the things that are attractive to you in the sense of the work you do, what you're studying, what you're writing.
I don't know. I think that since I was young, I have memories when I was basically homeless and just couch surfing with friends. And I'm I got into college. I'm about to do another interview to work 2 jobs while I'm in high school. Shit is not going to be easy. It sucks. I'm depressed, but I can keep going, or I can just give up. Mm-hmm. And so I've always been in that mindset. You can just give up now if you want, but something inside of me is no, you're not going to give up, because that's not who you are. Yeah. And I just think that that's just a core of me that I've had since I was little.
Got it. And, what's the work that you're looking to do in the future? You're writing, you're in law school right now. So
I'm just trying to survive in law school. I'm learning a whole new way of understanding, of reading cases, of analyzing things. They're having us talk about facts, rules of law, and the policies behind it. So I'm just and I'm trying to learn how to make sense of these cases and piece them together like building blocks. And just analyze things differently. And I really think that law school is just a place that they like to haze people and make them feel stupid. But then they go out of their way to make people feel stupid because it's already hard. But then the culture is very much hazing. They want you to feel like you're stupider than than you really should be and stuff. And I think that that's where I push back. Because I'm like, fuck that shit. I'm not going to let you intimidate me, because I've seen and done some things and have experienced things that other people in this classroom will never experience. Yeah. And I'm like book smart and street smart. So these motherfuckers are not going to haze me. Yeah. But I do recognize that it's hard. And I need to learn fast how to get through it, because it's really, really hard. It's like when you take a critical thinking class, like a philosophy kind of course and stuff. And it's like amplified times 10 or something. It's just really, really weird like way of thinking, but it's just my brain forming into another way of thought process. And so I just really need to humble myself in that regard and just move forward with that, because ideally one day I'd love to be in a place where I can do public health stuff with the CDC. And the cool thing about lawyers in the CDC are that they're also researchers. They wear different hats. They're doing the research. They can tell you the people's lifeline expectancy of life, depending on which zip code they fall under. And they've done the research to that. They understand that transportation is a cause, food scarce, food banks, etc. Like there's different factors that come into play. And so when they do that research, then they find the language so that they can apply it to the rule that's already in place with previous cases to create new rules if possible. And just kind of like, that's just me trying to make sense of it. It's way more complicated, but it's kind of something like that. Yeah. And I'm still learning that. And that's ideally something I'd love to do.
Yeah. And, you know, just to sort of start wrapping up, where can people find you, you know, if they want to follow your work?
Yeah, they can check out thebody.com, which is it's the platform that I write for. And, you know, you can like read so many amazing writers there. The cool thing about that platform, too, is that they also have other HIV pause writers as well. It's a great way to like really just mentor you and just kind of like write and heal through that process and make sense of where you are in this, you know, and where you fit into it, and realize that you have community. But you can also find me like on Instagram, Prince of Viana, spelled Viana, Viana, and it's just because that's my grandma's last name. Viana. Así que yeah, you can find me on Prince of Viana on Twitter and Instagram, and then and then my name, you know, on Facebook, Giuliani Alvarenga.
The last question I like to ask people is to help me title their episode.
Oh, really?
So yeah, there's a prompt. The prompt is a blank Latinx writer. So in that blank, you can put more than one word. You can switch all the words around, just whatever feels true to the writing you do now, to even the conversation, or just like how you identify as a writer.
A public health Latinx writer?
Okay, cool. Yeah. Speaks for itself. No, but it is what you're doing.
I definitely want to like emphasize how, and I'm also coming from now a place of like, as someone who's trying to like talk about breaking this stigma, like the more we talk about HIV and we normalize this and we talk about this amongst our spaces, because this isn't just a single issue problem. This affects all of us. But the sooner we realize that, the sooner we're going to see this change that people say it's going to happen, because people are saying that we're going to like end the epidemic in 10 years, but that's not going to happen if we keep criminalizing people with HIV. Like there are like 36 states that still have statutes that can like criminalize someone if they don't like tell their status, regardless of whether they're undetectable or not. And rather than coming from a legal standpoint of shame and antagonizing, if we can only find a positive outlet for that, that would be even better. If we could provide housing, if we can push back on big pharma greed, if we can break like stigmas, whether it be like racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, like a lot of stuff, right? It's a lot to unpack. But if people at least made the time for that conversation, because it is possible, we could definitely see that change.